really pleased to be joined by Alice ter Haar. Alice, thank you very much for giving up your time to do this. And I think we probably could have talked for hours. So I think we're gonna go ahead and crack through these questions. But before we do, very quick intro for anyone who may not yet be familiar. So, I'll then ask you to give a bit of context for us if you wouldn't mind. But so you're the founder of Badass Unicorn. So I absolutely love this potential by turbocharging badassery for the brilliance and mindset needed to thrive. I think that's an absolutely fantastic concept. But basically, you're working with high growth organizations and fundamentally you're running an amazing training organization and will go in and help these teams really unlock their potential. So we'll hear more about that. But you're a massive social commentator. I know you speak on the circuit with places like Advertising Week and the CIPD Festival, and write as well for Marketing Week. But I know you'll tell us a bit about your story because this, kind of how did this all come about? But first of all, thank you very, very much. And would you kick us off giving a little bit of info about what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am a bit of a chatterbox, so anyone gives me a mic and invites me to be honest and share my warts and all journey, I'm down. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate. So yeah, you summarised badassery and potential and all of that good stuff. Essentially, our business is all about going into high growth organizations like you mentioned, Google, McDonald's, Bloom and Wild, Deliveroo, who I used to work for, is now a client. The list goes on. And essentially, we go in there to work either on mindset, I call that attitude of fortitude. So that's things like growth mindset, resilience, psychological safety, all of that good stuff, or on making spikes spikier. So this is about unlocking people's one of a kind magic. So that's things like confidence, being amazing line managers, to personality preferences, strengths, North Star visions, and all that personal development goodness.
Wow. Okay. I love the concept and I love the energy that you bring to this and unlocking the potential within those teams. But if you look, you said that you worked with Deliveroo and this career pivot was driven by a really very real setback. And it's been a really challenging year for senior marketers last year. So I know there's a lot of senior marketers kind of navigating uncertainty, maybe considering their next move. What did that experience teach you about resilience, which is key, and self-belief?
Love it. Well, to anybody that's listening right now who's having a tough old time, believe me, you're not the only one. And I have very much been there. So if anyone isn't familiar with my story, I joined Deliveroo pretty early on and I was smart and hungry and worked hard and, vaguely capable. And I rose quite quickly through the marketing ranks. And so 2018, I'm running European marketing for Deliveroo. So pretty big job with a big job title. And Deliveroo was kind of the jewel of the UK Silicon Roundabout, is it called? Crown. And I was feeling pretty good about myself. I'd done the marketing academy, watch me. And unfortunately, the role had actually started to outgrow me. So when I, in hindsight now, look back, my strengths, the thing that I'm amazing at, the thing that I love to do is all about communicating on stage, running workshops, working with people one to one, storytelling. And although there are aspects of that in marketing, perhaps if I'd been more of a brand side marketer, I would have had more leverage or long like runway in a marketing career. But I was in a commercial marketing role and I was working for a tech company that was founded by someone that worked for that used to work in investment banking, right? So they're numbers, 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 and some more numbers, cohort analysis, pivot tables, shebang. And I'll be honest, that's just not my game. And I then was not succeeding in that role because
Mhm.
it wasn't the right fit for me. And essentially, I got caught out. So I got pulled into a room and told that I was being demoted. I mean, they didn't quite use that language, but I'll fast forward for the interest of the people on the call. And I had been one of those people, many people listening may also empathize with this. I don't know what you're like, Susie, but at that point, I was, turning 30, and so much of my self-worth had been built on my career. And it felt
Mhm.
so good when I had the shiny trophy that I felt everybody wanted. And suddenly that was literally ripped from my clutches. And from going and feeling super capable and like in demand, suddenly it was like, no, you're actually not good enough. And it was pretty horrendous. I'm not going to lie. I went home, cried to my mum like a baby again. And you asked what it teaches you about resilience and experience like that. I went really low, the change curve, and you go into this depression bit. Like it was humiliating, removing myself from the marketing lead Slack group, having to hand over all my responsibility, having to change my title on LinkedIn, like literally having to welcome this new person in who was better than me. And it sucked really hard for a bit. But luckily, because I had found the magic of personal development, I put my growth mindset pants on and I was like, okay, why did this happen? It's not because you're not brilliant. It's just you weren't brilliant at that. And it was really the catalyst for me to go full knee deep dive straight in
Yeah.
to the kind of personal development explorations that I had been doing at that point. It had been a passion project, was then a side hustle. And anyway, because I've been going on for way too long now, I will culminate by saying over the next 2 years, I pivoted to an L&D role at marketing. I started trying to make money from this personal development passion. And that was 6 years ago now. And I get to count Network Rail and, Google and Ovo Energy as clients. So um, it ended out all right, basically. So yeah, that's what I learned about resilience. And in terms of self-belief, I think, we talked earlier about a talk that I'm about to do that I can't really talk too much about yet. But the thing that I've learned is that a parent's love is the most important thing that you can have to create self-belief. And, my mum believed in me even when I didn't get the main part in the school play. And she still thought I was brilliant, even when I nicked Kitty's ballet shoes from her house, pretending that they were mine. And she still thought I was brilliant, even though I wasn't the director of European marketing at Deliveroo. And having that safety net of even when all of the accolades get taken away from you, there are people who still think the sun shines out your bum. I'd say that's the most important thing for self-belief.
I think you're absolutely right. What a wonderful gift that you have there. What you went from being very low to going on the growth mindset journey. I'm a big believer. I've been on a similar path. What was the if people are listening now, they're going to be that sounds great, but what was that first little step that you took? Was it a podcast that you listened to? Was it a book? You may not even remember, but if someone's listening now and they're having that, they're still in that sort of wallow, what's that first little step they could consider, that unlock moment that will help them on the right path?
I think I could say a lot of things, and this isn't a silver bullet, but it is the most important thing, which is self-forgiveness. You know, was it okay that I wasn't as good as I wanted to be, as I wanted people to think I was at that job? Like, was it okay? Was I still okay? Was I still, an okay person? And I think when I forgave myself for, I guess, letting myself down,
Yeah,
I was able to rebuild and kind of like set myself free. And I think after it happened, it was incredibly liberating because the truth is, I had been going at 100 miles an hour in second gear
yeah,
for like 2 years. And as the role continued to demand more of me, and as I continued to fall behind, I had to work harder and harder and harder and do more and feel like I needed to prove myself more and lean into my development opportunities. Bollocks, they're not opportunities, they're areas, and we have to bridge them. But if you're working in a role that requires you to spend too much time in those areas of weakness, well, you're probably not in the right role, and I wasn't. So, giving if there anybody that's in that wallow, let yourself free, you're okay. And then just try and do things that make you feel positive about yourself. Like that might be going for a walk, listening to a
yeah.
podcast. Um, And for me, actually sharing openly about the experience, that was really empowering because it meant I owned the story, I own the narrative. I'm not here ashamed. I'm not sitting here pretending like this never happened. I'm going to own it. And I think people grew to have a lot of respect for me for that. You know, I stayed at Deliveroo in spite of what happened because I realized it was actually fundamentally still a good place for me to be and that I was now on the journey to doing something else and that it was a good springboard. Um, but I think I earned a lot of friends doing that. And people have been, following on that journey ever since. Because as we know, vulnerability is the best currency for connection that we can get.
Yeah, it was a very brave approach for you to take, but it must have felt like an enormous relief. You were clearly in the wrong role for your skill set, and that's exhausting. You were doing your best, but it's absolutely exhausting. Um, we've spoken about critical, or touched on kind of having this a growth mindset, positive mindset. Thinking of these kind of senior marketing leaders who are trying to assess about their next move. Any thoughts as to how, in terms of your experience, how do they know if they're truly ready, like mentally, to make this next move? I know there's a lot of people like holding back at the moment. Is there anything you would share in terms of how to? I guess I've just said use the word brave. You were very brave to kind of take control and make a decision. Um, what would you share in terms of mindset for people who are maybe sat on the fence? Do they make the move? Do they stay where they are?
Obviously, the decoy answer is, everybody has different circumstances and
Yeah.
different times. And I do think that we have different eras and seasons in our lives. And there might be a period where it makes sense for you to sit tight. And, I've been running my business now for 5 years. I've been on maternity leave for like two of those. I couldn't be firing on all cylinders. I had to kind of do the
Yep.
equivalent of sit tight. So, also don't beat yourself up if right now is the right time because you've got other things going on that mean that your career is actually not the number one priority right now. Um, but I guess I would invite your listeners, our wonderfully esteemed leaders of the call, to just ask how much of what's stopping them is their own self-limiting beliefs. Because I think if that's what's holding you back, then that's what we've got to work on, right? It's
Mhm.
about taking those beliefs to court and being like, okay, well, what leads me to believe that this is true? And where's the evidence for me thinking this? And what assumptions am I making about myself or, the future? Um, and yeah, just starting to my perspective, someone who you may know, Sarah Ellis, who is part of Squiggly Careers, she once gave she loves this piece of career advice, which is she never wants to live the same year twice. So you might be staying in a new role, but then finding other ways to bring newness, novelty, learning,
Mhm.
progression, innovation into your
Yeah.
life. It might be starting a new hobby. It might be training for a marathon. It could be any number of things. It could be leaning into other areas of work that you have always been sort of curious about. So I think there were ways to move forward without necessarily having to make any hugely bold moves. But if anybody is in between thinking about making bold moves and the thing that's holding them back is their own shitty committee, then there's some there's some conversations to be had, some internal conversations to be had, and some holding hands with your imposter
Yeah.
and bringing them on the journey with you.
And from the work that you do with these organizations, these high growth companies, what are the observations, kind of what differentiates the senior leaders who thrive and excel from the ones that get a bit stuck, the ones who kind of plateau?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think in the leaders that you see really excel, there is a humility, but that's balanced with real confidence and capability. And it's a real nuance to be able to hold both of those things of vulnerability and humility and approachability, but then also don't get twisted, I'm still badass at what I do. Do you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
I am still very trustworthy and credible. And they seem to hold those two things beautifully. I'm sure it's like ducks under the surface where they're still like, oh, I was too soft, oh, I was too hard, oh, I was too direct. And it's probably not quite as calm as they appear to be. But I think that they do that really, really well. I think they're always hungry to learn. Um, and they're always taking initiative and they don't wait for things to happen to them. They don't wait for somebody to set their KPIs or write their development plan for them. They're booking the meeting and saying, these are the things that I'd like to discuss with you, you know? So, yeah, those would be the things that I see people differentiate themselves through that balance of humility and credibility, and then that kind of curiosity and proactivity.
It's continuous learning, isn't it, as well, even at that senior level. And when you do the training, you talk about ROI, but return on the individual rather than sort of return on investment, which is a really powerful idea. Would you mind just explaining a bit more about sort of what that is, and how should senior marketers being investing in themselves?
I'd love to. So, obviously, one of the advantages of being a marketer and then starting your own business is that you're okay with creative and words and copywriting and, things like that. So, anybody on the call who's ever thinking about running their own business, let me tell you, you've got some very good skills to be able to take forward, like coming up with brilliant terminology like return on investment. Oh, sorry, internal return on individual, I should say. So, for me, this is all about. I fundamentally believe that every single person, certainly on this call, but every person around the world has a unique set of skills and gifts. We're all different, completely different. There's a 1 in 15 quadrillion chance that, that sperm met that egg and Gesundheit, like every one of us is a gift. Some of us are grow up in a way in which we believe that. Some of us sadly do not. And the damage can be done from, yeah, in the womb, for goodness sake. But, that can be affected all the way along. But that can be affected by a bad boss or being made redundant. We're not immune once we kind of get a little bit older. Anyway, I'm waffling there. But I think everybody has a unique set of skills and gifts. And return on individual is about turning that on for each person and making them realize, what do I have to give? What excites me, what makes me jump out of bed in the morning, all of the cliche bits. And for companies, it's about how do I unlock that magic within my organization by galvanizing people around what they have to give and the challenges that we have as a business and how we kind of bring those things together.
And what any tips for kind of senior marketers who are looking to make investment in their career, investment in their career, investment in themselves at the kind of starting point? So if someone doesn't already have that habit of self-investing, where do they start?
I mean, my gateway drug was audiobooks.
Yeah.
So the first audiobook that I listened to that really changed my life was The Chimp Paradox by Stephen
Yeah.
Peters. And I remember his dulcet Newcastle tones and how he took you on a journey. And I personally, despite the fact that I work in this field, I find a lot of personal development books. I find non-fiction really quite hard to digest.
Yeah.
And I started listening to it on my commute to work. I was working for Whitbread, the FTSE 100 kind of hospitality business at the time. And I had commutes to fill. And that for me was a really easy entry point into this space, taking what is essentially dead time, your commute. Although I'm sure, we can all use our commutes productively, but I found that to be a really useful entry point for me. And I try to go to something, I try to invest in myself, whether it's a 1 day conference, whether it's a networking event, whether it's something, a big one once a quarter, and probably a small something once a month to give an idea of like frequency and cadence. And then at different periods of, I mean, I've been in therapy now for 5 years. My psychotherapist is a legend. And that kind of acts for me almost like a coaching space. And it's really important for what I do because in order for me to be able to serve who I serve, I have to be
Mhm.
able to kind of have my needs met as well. So I use that almost like a one-to-one space. But I would say if you find somebody that one-to-one can really bring out something amazing in you, that might be a mentor, that might be a paid coach, that might be a course that you see that you think, yeah, that sounds absolutely amazing. Um, give yourself permission to invest the time to do it. Like,
Mhm.
I think one of the challenges I see with senior leaders in particular, you wouldn't believe the number of senior leaders that invest in a training with somebody like me, and then half the senior leadership team are not in the room. And you've got to ask yourself, what is that saying to your team? In my opinion, it's a clear sign of dysfunction. Either you're too busy and you can't like physically be there, in which case there's something wrong, you're not managing priorities well enough, or it means you're arrogant enough to think you don't have anything to learn, or you don't think that actually there's some value to be gained by sitting there and being present with your team and sharing that space and hearing what they have to say. So as we get more senior, obviously the demands on our time and our priorities become more demanding, but the demand for us actually taking some time to say, I want to be better, I want to hear you, um, I want to grow, we shouldn't let those demands wane.
Mm. Okay. Um, I think those are some good kind of bits to kind of think things to for people to consider, particularly the audio books. In terms, it's just sometimes I find it's just someone taking that very first step in terms of that self investment. And what about companies who might be interested or would consider fundamentally the kind of the training that your business provides? What could someone expect, in terms of, what's the kind of process? What kind of outcomes could a company expect?
Yes. So fundamentally, obviously, you've got different topics that you can go into, whether it's growth mindset or confidence or what I call career catalysts. So, what are your strengths and how do you lean into them, and all of those types of things. But what unites all of the workshops is that they're very interactive, super practical. I try and do as little talking as possible, not like today. And so, it's very much about me inviting. I always say I'm a guide, I'm a facilitator. I'm not there as the expert. Um, I'm just here to create the space for the people in the room to have a conversation. And yeah, what people come away with is obviously some improved skill in X or Y that we may have been working on, improved resilience or so on. But I think the thing that's really exciting that I love to see is firstly, there's a halo effect of psychological safety with the group. Because when you create a space like that and invite people to be vulnerable, to be open, to share, to work together in a way that's kind of adjacent to work, but not work,
Mhm.
it just creates a sense of kind of like connection and togetherness and like kindred spirit that is really powerful. And then there's this sense of, as you might be able to tell, I'm quite high energy. Um, and apparently it's infectious. So, my passion, my enthusiasm, my, as I've branded it, inspiring relatability, um, I think makes people think, okay, I could do that. I can
Yeah.
lean into my badassery. I can find my edge. I can be a bit braver. I can be a bit more vulnerable. And yeah, you'll kind of see a little bit of that coming through in your team as well.
No, I love the high energy element. So to finish this off, Alice, so if a senior leader wants to become, um, I guess, the best version of themselves or the strongest candidate, if we're looking at kind of a career scenario for their next step, what mindset shift or action would you encourage them to kind of take?
Great question. Look, I think I heard something at a conference once. I was about 2 years into running Badass, maybe 3 years into running Badass. And everywhere you look, there are lots of people like me. There's lots of people who found themselves in COVID and now started their own companies and blah. And everyone says the same thing: high potential, high performance, growth. And I heard this woman, Shari, at a conference say, you need to find your edge. And the penny dropped for me that I was just using all the same lingo and there wasn't really anything differentiating me from anybody else. And in a way, you think that's going to win you more work because you're not going to upset anybody or, you apply to everybody. But what I've found is the more I've niched in, the more myself I've been, I've got unicorns all over my creds. I had someone reach out from the UK's biggest beauty company this week. I've just had a new business meeting with them. Said, "Wow, yours is the first material that seems like unique. I love it. Like I'm so energized." This was from sending like my creds and a few LinkedIn posts that I'm proud of. And my advice would be not to shy away from yourself. Find your edge, know what your spikes are, make them spikier. If you are not in an organization that allows that true part of you to thrive, like recognize it. Doesn't mean you have to do anything about it yet, but if you want to fulfill your potential, if you want to be the best human ever, if you want to blah, 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 if you want to have a good time, frankly, you need those two things to come together. You and your badass, magic, one of a kind amazingness in an organization or an environment that allows that to come out, not one where you feel like you have to mask or make yourself smaller. And yeah, find somewhere where you can be in your edge and excel for it.
I love that. Fantastic. It's where you can be your authentic self, basically, and that comes down to the culture fit of the business as much as anything else.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. And I always think, I don't know what your advice is on this, Susie, but like, especially as you get more senior, job interviews are a two-way street. Do you know what I mean? It's not them who has all the power. It's whether or not you think that this business can handle you, is good enough for you, um is going to make you happy. So I think people can do well to remember that sometimes.
You're absolutely right. It should be a strategic discussion, not a sort of transactional Q&A.
Right.
And I'm a firm believer that actually the most important thing is fit. It's chemistry fit and culture fit, and that's the key to success, especially in a senior leadership role. But Alice, thank you. Fantastic answers. Brilliant to have had the time with you. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.